The late afternoon sun cast a dull amber hue over the Quivara Livestock Auction Grounds. Dust hovered in the warm September air, clinging to the sweat on every brow and boot. The steady murmur of buyers and ranchers faded abruptly when someone let out a sharp whistle near pen number 14. Inside the wooden enclosure, half buried in loose dirt and hay, was something no one expected to see that day. A mare, alive, barely breathing, and clearly in distress. Her eyes flicked rapidly, ears twitching, and her sides heaved as if every breath was a battle. That horse wasn't just suffering. She was pregnant. Colton Arvale stood at the gate, hands gripping the top rail. His weathered face was drawn tight, mouth half open as if frozen between commands. Next to him, Mason Querrelle crouched low, studying the animal's shallow rise and fall with the trained eye of a man who'd seen his fair share of dying livestock, but never like this. Around them, a group of seasoned ranchers, Tyler Sunrosa, Grayson Marvale, Blake Oroville, Dawson Quivara, and Landon Serrano, gathered in silent disbelief, their cowboy hats low over furrowed brows, trying to make sense of the scene in front of them. The mare, later identified by her brand as Suntrail, had no business being there. No one had registered her for auction. No one claimed to have seen her brought in. And yet, there she was, like a ghost from another life, half buried and terrified. Her coat was caked in dried mud and blood, her hooves scraped raw. As Wyatt Corvado, the auction manager, approached with a flashlight and a heavy breath, the group parted without a word. He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her neck. Her skin flinched at his touch, but she didn't resist. She couldn't. "We need to get her out," Mason said, voice low, almost a whisper. "Now." But no one moved right away. Something about the mare's presence froze them, not just because of her condition, but because of something else, something none of them could explain. There was a weight in the air, a tension that didn't come from the dirt or the blood or the mystery. It came from memory. Jackson Mirello, the quietest among them, finally broke the silence. "That horse," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the creaking boards. "I've seen her before. Years ago. She belonged to someone who disappeared." The men looked at one another. Eyes narrowed. Thoughts raced. And that was the moment they all knew this wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something buried long ago. The next morning, before the first rays touched the tops of the barns, Colton Arvale was already at the pen. He hadn't slept. The image of Suntrail, trembling in the dirt, haunted him. Something about her eyes, wild yet familiar, had lodged itself deep in his chest. He wasn't just worried about her survival. He was afraid of what she might represent. His gut told him this wasn't random. And in a town like Quivara, nothing stayed buried forever. Mason Querrelle arrived with a vet kit and a thermos of black coffee. His boots dragged through the dust, worn from years on the field but steady. He didn't need to ask Colton anything. The silence between the two men said it all. Mason knelt beside Suntrail, now in a makeshift stall under a tin roof. Her breathing had stabilized overnight, but she remained distant, her ears pinned back, tail twitching at every sound. He gently placed a hand on her belly and nodded. "She's close," he muttered. "Maybe a week or two at most." Inside the barn office, Wyatt Corvado had started digging into the auction records. No mention of Suntrail. No trailer logs, no signatures, nothing. It was as if she had been dropped there out of thin air. But Wyatt knew better. Someone wanted her hidden, buried, and the fact that she was still alive wasn't part of the plan. His hands shook slightly as he flipped through the dusty ledger. He paused on a name he hadn't seen in years, Harlan Mirello, Jackson's father. Grayson Marvale and Tyler Sunrosa sat by the hay bales, watching the barn like sentries. Tyler, chewing slowly on a matchstick, kept his eyes on Jackson. The boy hadn't said much since yesterday, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "You sure you recognize her?" Grayson finally asked. Jackson nodded slowly. I used to feed her when I was a kid. She was my dad's favorite, until he vanished. That word hung in the air. Vanished, as if it carried weight no one wanted to touch. Blake Arvale paced near the loading docks, whispering something to Dawson Quivara, who kept glancing toward the back entrance of the barn. If someone wanted her gone, they'll come back for her, Blake said. And if she belonged to Harlan Mirello, we might be in for a hell of a storm. Dawson didn't reply, but his jaw clenched. Outside, the wind picked up. Dust swirled through the cracks in the wood. And inside that quiet barn, Suntrail blinked slowly, as if waking from a long nightmare, unaware that her return had stirred something that had been sleeping in every man standing there. By noon, word had spread through the town like wildfire. A buried mare had been found alive at the Quivara auction. Old ranchers who hadn't stepped foot on the grounds in years suddenly showed up, pretending to check on cattle but really just trying to get a look at her. Some said it was a miracle. Others called it a warning. But deep down, everyone knew something dark had resurfaced. Inside the barn, tension simmered. Jackson Mirello sat alone on an overturned feed bucket, staring at Suntrail like she held every answer he'd never gotten. His father, Harlan, had disappeared over a decade ago. No note. No body. Just an old pickup truck found abandoned near the state line and a barn left to rot. No one talked about him anymore, especially not Colton. But now, seeing that mare again, it was like a door had cracked open in Jackson's mind. Memories he hadn't touched since he was 10 came flooding back. Late-night arguments, strange men at the ranch, and the way his father used to whisper to Suntrail like she was more than just a horse. Mason paced near the gate, watching Colton, who was unusually quiet. "You knew Harlan better than anyone," he said, not asking, stating. Colton didn't meet his eyes. "That was a long time ago." Mason pressed. "You think this is just a coincidence? That Suntrail shows up buried alive in your auction yard, pregnant, after all these years." Colton took a long breath and looked at the horizon. "No, I don't." Grayson and Blake stood by the fence line, speaking low. "Harlan was into something back then," Blake said. "Land deals, illegal stud trades, maybe worse. I remember folks warning him to back off. Then he vanished." Grayson nodded slowly. "And now his horse comes back. Pregnant. Looks like someone didn't bury everything as deep as they thought." Inside the stall, Suntrail shifted her weight and let out a low, guttural breath. She was healing, slowly. But every movement she made felt loaded with tension, as if her very presence disturbed the balance of the place. Jackson finally stood and approached her, placing a hand gently on her mane. "What did he do to you?" he whispered. "What did he do to all of us?" And in that still, dusty moment, as wind moaned through the gaps in the wood, the past no longer felt like a memory. It felt like it was walking back through the door, one hoof at a time. The sun had begun to dip behind the ridge when Colton finally spoke. The barn was quiet, just the occasional rustling of straw beneath Suntrail's shifting weight. Jackson stood near the stall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the old man. Everyone else lingered nearby, pretending to clean tools or sort ropes, but really, they were all listening. Colton's voice was low, gravelly, almost hesitant. "I didn't think I'd ever see her again," he said. "I buried that part of my life a long time ago." Mason stepped forward. "You knew she was Harlan's, didn't you?" Colton nodded. "We raised her together. Bred her from one of the fastest studs in the county. She was special. But by the end, she wasn't just a horse to Harlan. She was leverage. That mare got him into circles he never should have entered." His voice cracked on the last word, like it hurt to even say it out loud. For a moment, no one moved. Jackson stared at him, jaw tight. "You knew what he was doing?" Colton looked at the boy. "No, the man. standing in front of him, and something inside him softened. "I knew he was desperate," Colton said. "Your father was drowning in debt. Owed money to men who didn't come knocking twice. I told him to walk away, but he didn't listen. And when he vanished, I assumed the worst. I didn't ask questions. Maybe I should have." Blake Auravale shook his head. "So why now? Why does the damn horse come back now, out of nowhere, and pregnant?" Colton turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "Because someone wanted her gone but didn't finish the job. And whoever that was, they know we're still here. They're sending a message." The room chilled, even though the evening heat still hung heavy in the air. Dawson Quivara, silent until now, finally spoke. "Then we better be ready when they come looking." Outside, the sound of tires crunching gravel echoed through the stillness. A truck slowed near the outer gate, dark windows, unfamiliar plates. It didn't stop. It kept rolling, slow and steady, then vanished behind the tree line. Tyler Sunrosa moved toward the door. "We need to tighten this place up. Lock everything. Suntrail doesn't leave our sight." Inside, Jackson knelt beside the mare again, hand brushing over the faint scar on her flank, one he didn't remember from before. And for the first time since she'd returned, he realized something. Suntrail hadn't just survived. She was carrying a secret no one had dared to uncover. A sharp cry broke the silence of the early morning. It came from Suntrail's stall, not a scream of pain, but something primal, raw, and urgent. Jackson bolted up from the cot he'd been sleeping on in the corner of the barn. Mason was already at the gate, flashlight in hand, boots thudding against the concrete floor. Inside the stall, Suntrail was on her side, legs kicking, her body convulsing in the throes of early labor. The birth had started, and it was too soon. "She's not ready," Mason muttered, voice tense as he knelt beside her. "Too much stress. Too much trauma. This foal might not make it." Jackson crouched beside him, heart hammering in his chest. But even as Suntrail writhed in pain, his eyes were drawn to something else. A mark, faint but visible, just beneath the dried mud on her shoulder. He wiped it clean with his sleeve, and what emerged wasn't the original ranch brand she'd carried as a filly. It was new, crude, and unfamiliar, burned over the old one to cover it. Jackson stood up slowly, his mind spinning. "Someone tried to erase her past," he said. "But not well enough." Colton and the others arrived seconds later, drawn by the noise. When he saw the mark, Colton's face drained of color. "That's not a local brand," he whispered. "That's cartel work. I've seen it before, on stolen livestock moved across the border." A heavy silence fell over them. The implications were too big to speak all at once. If Suntrail had been trafficked, if Harlan had gotten involved with a smuggling ring, then this wasn't just about a missing man or a buried horse. It was about something darker. Something dangerous. "We have to call Clay," Grayson said firmly. "Now." But Colton shook his head. "Not yet. If we bring the sheriff in before we know who we're dealing with, we'll scare them off. We need answers. And we need that foal to live." Outside, the sky began to darken even though it was barely afternoon, storm clouds rolling in fast. As the wind picked up, Jackson stayed at Suntrail's side, whispering soft encouragements as she fought to bring life into the world. And in that storm-lit stall, surrounded by men who'd buried too many truths, a new life pushed forward, covered in sweat, blood, and generations of secrets. And somewhere beyond the trees, someone was watching. The foal came just after the first crack of thunder. A fragile, trembling shape covered in slick membranes and bathed in the dim light of the storm rolling in. Jackson caught him, a colt, in his arms as Suntrail let out one final, exhausted breath and collapsed into the straw. Mason moved fast, cleaning the newborn's nostrils, checking its heartbeat, gently rubbing its coat to stimulate breath. "He's breathing," Mason said, relief thick in his voice. He's weak, but he's here." Everyone stood around the stall in silence, soaking in the miracle they had just witnessed. The colt blinked slowly, trying to focus his eyes, already trying to stand on wobbly legs. But Colton wasn't watching the foal. His eyes were fixed on Suntrail, and the branded scar still fresh on her shoulder. "This isn't over," he said under his breath. "This is just the start." Dawson Quivara stepped closer, eyes narrowed. "You think this foal, he's valuable?" Colton gave a slow nod. "He's worth more than we know, and someone out there wants him gone." Jackson wrapped the colt in a blanket and stepped back. There was something about him, the color of his coat, the shape of his jaw, that stirred a memory deep in his mind. "He looks like," he started, but stopped. Blake Arvale finished the thought, "like Harlan's old stud. The one he claimed disappeared right before he did." The realization spread like fire. If this colt was descended from that bloodline, then Suntrail had been bred on purpose. This wasn't random. It was planned. Grayson walked to the barn doors and peered out into the heavy rain. "We need to move them somewhere safe. If whoever did this comes back..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Wyatt Corvado stepped in with urgency. "There's an old calving barn on the back end of the Serrano property. Nobody uses it anymore. We can set them up there." Landon Serrano nodded. "It's isolated. Quiet. No one will find them unless they're already looking." Jackson hesitated. His whole body buzzed with adrenaline, confusion, fear. "What if they are already looking?" he asked. And no one answered. Because deep down, they all felt it. The eyes watching, the silence in the trees, the cold breath of the past creeping closer. As the storm raged harder, Colton turned to Jackson. "We'll take them tonight," he said firmly. "But you need to be ready. This colt, he may be the only piece of proof left. And proof, in a town like Quivara, could get a man killed." The rain hadn't let up by nightfall. Thick sheets fell over the Texas plains, turning every dirt road into a slick, dangerous trail. Jackson sat in the passenger seat of Colton's old truck, holding the colt wrapped tightly in burlap and towels. Suntrail was in the trailer hitched behind them, sedated just enough to keep her calm. The headlights barely cut through the fog as they crawled along the back roads toward the abandoned calving barn on Landon Serrano's property. "Keep your eyes sharp," Colton muttered, gripping the wheel tighter than usual. "This road doesn't get much traffic. If we see lights behind us, we got trouble." Jackson glanced in the side mirror. Nothing but rain and blackness. Still, his gut churned. The whole town felt different now. Heavier, older, like it had been waiting years for this night to happen. And through all the questions swirling in his head, one thought kept rising. Who branded Suntrail, and why now? When they reached the barn, Landon was already waiting with Blake and Dawson. They had cleared the space, laid out dry straw, and set up fencing around the interior. It was quiet, too quiet. No bugs, no frogs, just the sound of rain hitting the tin roof like a ticking clock. As they moved Suntrail into place and helped the colt stand on his feet again, Grayson arrived last, soaking wet and pale. "We've got tire tracks," he said. "Fresh. On the east trail, heading toward the auction yard. And they're not from anyone we know." Mason arrived moments later, holding something wrapped in a plastic feed bag. He opened it slowly. Inside was an old, rusted horseshoe, notched and bent, but with a marking on the side, the initials H.M. Jackson's chest tightened. "That's my dad's," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "He used to brand his tools with that mark." Mason nodded grimly. "Found it nailed into the back wall of the barn this morning. Someone left it. Like a calling card." Colton paced the barn, fists clenched. "Whoever this is, they're playing games. They know we're digging. And they want us to remember Harlan." Dawson looked toward Jackson. The question is, why now? Why let Suntrail live? Why leave clues? No one had answers, only fear and silence. As lightning struck somewhere beyond the hills, the colt let out a sharp cry, high, defiant, alive. And in that sound, Jackson heard it clearly. This wasn't just about the past anymore. This was a message. And it was far from over. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the storm. The barn smelled of wet wood, hay, and something else, old, metallic, like rusted iron. Jackson didn't sleep. He sat near the colt all night, listening to every creak in the wood, every sudden gust of wind that passed through the cracked siding. Something had shifted. Not just in the barn, in them. Colton returned just after sunrise with a dusty envelope in his hand, his face pale and unreadable. "I broke into Harlan's old place," he said flatly. "No one's touched it in years. But someone's been there recently. Muddy footprints. Open drawers. And this." He tossed the envelope onto the table. Inside were old photographs, yellowed and curled at the edges, pictures of Suntrail, younger, healthier, next to another stallion. A stallion branded with the same crude symbol burned over her original mark. Mason picked up one of the photos. "That's not just a stud. That's a bloodline. Whoever bred her, they've been building toward something." Jackson looked closer and noticed something else. In one photo, Harlan stood in the background, half-shadowed but unmistakable. And next to him was another man, face turned away, wearing a sheriff's badge. "Wait," Jackson whispered. "That badge, is that Sheriff Clay?" The room froze. Grayson stepped forward. Clay said he had no idea what happened to Harlan. That he searched for him. But if he was with him, Dawson clenched his fists. Then Clay's not who we thought he was. And he's been watching us this whole time. The pieces started falling into place like dominoes, the missing registration logs, the pressure to stay quiet, the threats that never came from strangers but from inside the town. Outside, the faint sound of gravel crunching under tires echoed again. This time, they all heard it. Colton moved quickly, peering out through a crack in the wall. A black SUV had stopped by the edge of the woods. Tinted windows. Engine running. No movement. "They're here," he muttered. "And they're not hiding anymore." Jackson turned to the colt, who stood now beside his mother, legs strong, head high, completely unaware of the storm surrounding him. But in that moment, Jackson understood. This wasn't about a horse. It wasn't even about his father. It was about power, blood, and the truth too dangerous to bury. And now, someone was willing to kill to keep it buried. The black SUV was gone by sunrise, but its presence lingered like smoke in the air. No one spoke much that morning. They fortified the barn, reinforced the doors, stacked hay bales against the windows, double-checked every lock. It felt more like preparing for war than protecting a horse. But in their gut, they all knew, whoever had been watching was done hiding. And someone close, too close, had betrayed them. Colton gathered them near the back wall of the barn. His voice was low, steady. "We don't call the sheriff. Not now. Not until we know where he stands." Mason nodded, still holding the photos they found at Harlan's place. If Clay was working with Harlan, if he helped cover up whatever happened, then he's part of this. And he knows we're onto him. Blake Arvale added, which means he could be the one who tried to bury Suntrail alive. Jackson stood near the stall, hand resting gently on the colt's back. The foal was growing stronger by the hour, and so was the weight of the truth. "So what do we do?" he asked. "Wait here like sitting ducks?" Dawson Quivara shook his head. "We draw a line. We make it clear, if they want to come for her, they'll have to do it in the open. No more shadows. No more secrets." That evening, Grayson and Landon drove back into town under the guise of checking cattle. At the local diner, Sheriff Clay Bennett was exactly where they expected him. Sitting in his usual booth, coffee in hand, reading a paper he wasn't really looking at. When they entered, he glanced up and smiled, but something in his eyes was colder than before. Grayson slid into the booth across from him. "Heard some folks poking around Harlan's old place," he said casually. Clay didn't flinch. He sipped his coffee. "That so?" Landon leaned forward. "Found some pictures. One had your badge in it." The sheriff's hand stopped mid-air. The silence hung like a blade between them. Then, finally, he spoke. "You boys don't know what you're messing with." His tone was flat, final. "Let it go." Back at the barn, the wind had picked up again. Jackson stood outside, shotgun in hand, watching the tree lean. Colton joined him, eyes scanning the horizon. "You scared?" Jackson asked. Colton exhaled slowly. "Son, I've been scared for years. But I'm done running." And just as the last light faded, two more vehicles appeared down the ridge. No headlights, just shapes in the dark, coming straight for them. The two trucks stopped just before the fence line, engines idling in the dark. The barn stood still in the distance, quiet, almost defiant under the moonlight. Jackson held the shotgun steady, every nerve in his body pulled tight. Inside, Suntrail paced slowly in her stall, the Colt close at her side. She could feel it too, the tension in the air, the familiar scent of danger. Colton stepped out first. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't run. He simply stood there, a silhouette of defiance against the glare of approaching headlights. "You don't have to do this," he shouted. "It ends tonight." From the driver's side of the lead truck, Sheriff Clay Bennett stepped out, followed by two men in plain clothes. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, cold, calculating. Clay walked closer, boots crunching on gravel. "You should have left it alone, Colton," he said. "Harlan made his choices. And so did I." Jackson stepped beside Colton, heart pounding. "Did you kill him?" Clay looked at the boy, paused, then said, "No. But I let him die. That's what he wanted, to disappear. To protect the mess he made." Mason, Blake, and Dawson emerged from the shadows around the barn, forming a wall of witnesses behind Colton. No one moved. No one blinked. Clay took one more step, then froze as the faint cry of the Colt echoed from the barn. He turned his head slightly, and something shifted in his expression. Regret? Memory? No one could tell. "That horse, that foal, they're part of something bigger than you know," he muttered. "Bloodlines worth thousands. Maybe more. That's why Harlan tried to hide them. That's why others tried to erase them." Colton nodded. "And that's why we're not letting you take them." A long silence followed. The two men behind Clay exchanged glances, uncertain. They hadn't expected resistance. Not like this. Clay sighed, then raised his hand, but not in aggression. He waved the men back. "Let it die with him," he said quietly. "Let the town move on." The trucks turned around and vanished into the night. The next morning, the barn was calm. Suntrail lay resting, her Colt curled beside her. Jackson sat nearby, exhausted but at peace for the first time in years. Colton placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your father, he made mistakes. But he also made choices to protect something pure. You deserve to know that." Jackson looked at the foal, strong, breathing steady, born from chaos but untouched by it. And for the first time, the past no longer felt like a curse. It felt like a legacy.